Chapter 1 of Fairy Fingers, a Novel. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. Recording by Kelly Taylor. Fairy Fingers by Cora Mowatt Ritchie. Chapter 1 Noblesse. They were seated in the drawing-room of an ancient château in Brittany. The Countess Dowager de Gramont and Count Tristan, her only son. A mansion lacking none of the ponderous quaintness that usually characterizes ancestral dwellings in that locality. The edifice could still boast of imposing grandeur, especially if classed among fine ruins. Within and without were harmoniously dilapidated, and a large portion of the interior was uninhabitable. The limited resources of the Count precluded even an apologetic semblance of repairs. The house was surrounded by spacious parks and pleasure grounds, in a similarly neglected condition. Their natural beauty was striking, and the rich soil yielded fruits and flowers in abundance, though its only culture was received from the hands of old Baptiste, who made his appearance as gardener in the morning, but with a total change of costume was metamorphosed into butler after sun passed over the meridian. In his buttonhole a flower, which he could never be induced to forego, betrayed his preference for the former vocation. The discussion between mother and son was unmistakably tempestuous. A thundercloud lowered on the noble lady's brow. Her eyes shot forth electric flashes, and her voice, usually subdued to aristocratic softness, was raised to storm pitch. "Count Tristan de Gramont, you have taken leave of your senses," a favorite declaration of persons thoroughly convinced of their own unassailable mental equilibrium when their convictions encounter the sudden check of opposition. As the assertion, unfortunately, is one that cannot be disproved by denial, the Count sank resignedly behind the shield of silence. His mother returned to the attack. "Do you mean me to understand, in your right mind, you would condescend to mingle with men of business? That you would actually degrade yourself into becoming a shareholder, or manager, or director, or whatever you please to term it, in a railway company? You, Count Tristan de Gramont! The very proposal is a humiliation. To entertain it would be an absurdity, to consent an impossibility. I repeat it, you have taken leave of your senses." "But, my dear mother," answered the Count, with marked deference, "you are forgetting that the railway company chances to be an American association. My connection with it, or rather its very existence, is not likely to be known here in Brittany. Therefore my dignity will not be compromised. The only valuable property left to us is the transatlantic estate, which my roving brother purchased during his wanderings in the New World, and bequeathed to my son Maurice, for whom it is held in trust by an American gentleman. The members of the association who desire to interest me in their speculation assert that the proposed railway would pass directly through this very tract of land. Should that be the case, its value will be greatly increased. At the present moment the estate yields us nothing, but the advent of this railroad must ensure an immense profit. We estimate that, by judicious management, the land may be made to bring in—" His mother interrupted him with a haughty gesture. "Speculation! Yield! Profit! Bring in! What language to grow familiar to the lips of a son of mine! You talk like a tradesman already. My son, give up all idea of this plebeian enterprise." The Count did not answer immediately. He seemed puzzled to determine what degree of confidence it was necessary to repose in his stately mother. After a brief pause, he renewed the conversation with evident embarrassment. It is very difficult to make a lady, especially a lady of your rank, education, and mode of life, understand these matters, and the necessity. It ought to be equally difficult to make the nobleman, my son, comprehend them, answered the Countess freezingly. The Count rejoined, as though driven to extremity, "It is the very fact of my being a nobleman that has made these people, Americans as they are, and despisers of title they profess to be, seek me with eagerness. The prestige of my title, the promise of obtaining some privileges respecting Maurice's Maryland estate, are all that I can contribute toward the success of their undertaking. It is true that I am a nobleman, but even rank, my dear mother, must have some means of sustaining its existence, to say nothing of preserving its dignity. Even rank is subject to the common vulgar need of food and raiment and shelter, not to mention the necessity of keeping horses, carriage, domestics, and securing other indispensable but money-consuming luxuries. Our narrow income is no longer sufficient to meet even our limited expenditures. The education of Maurice at the University of Paris and your own charities have not merely drained our purse, but involved us in debt. I hail the offer made me by this American company because it may extricate us from some very serious difficulties. I am much mortified at your resolute disapproval of this step I contemplate." Count Tristan de Gramont was a widower, the father of but one child. It must not be supposed that, although he seriously purposed embarking in a business enterprise, he had failed to appropriate a goodly share of that pride which had both descended by inheritance and had been liberally instilled into his mind by education. His character was strongly stamped with the Breton traits of obstinacy and perseverance, and he was gifted with an unaristocratic amount of energy. When an idea once took possession of his brain, he patiently and diligently brought the embryo thought into fruition, in spite of all disheartening obstacles. He was narrow-minded and selfish when any interest save his own and those of his mother and son were at stake. There were only two beings whom he loved, and he loved them because they were his, a portion of himself, and it was merely himself that he loved through them. In a certain sense he was a devoted son. His education had rendered him punctilious to the highest degree in the observance of all those forms that betoken filial veneration. He always treated his august mother with the most profound reverence. He paid her the most courteous attentions, opened the doors when she desired to pass, placed footstool for her feet, knelt promptly to pick up the handkerchief or glove she dropped, was ever ready to offer her his arm for support, and seldom combated her opinions. The first time he had openly ventured to oppose her views was in the conversation we had just related. She looked so regal as she sat before him in a richly carved antique chair, which she had occupied as though it had been a throne, that, in spite of the blind obstinacy with which she refused to see her own interest and his, Count Tristan could not help regarding her with admiration. She was still strikingly handsome, notwithstanding the 60 winters which had bleached her raven locks to the most uncompromising white. Those snowy tresses fell in soft and glossy curls about her scarcely furrowed countenance. Her forehead was somewhat low and narrow, the face a decided oval, the nose almost straight, the eyes almond-shaped and of jetty blackness, flashing out from beneath brows that were remarkable for the fine dark line that designated their arch. The mouth was the least pleasing feature. It was too small and unsuggested of varied expression. The lips not only lacked fullness, but wore a supercilious curl that had become habitual. Her form was considerably above medium height, and added to the sense of grandeur conveyed by her presence. Her carriage was erect to the verge of stiffness, and her step too firm to be quite soundless. Advancing years had not produced any unseemly embonpoint, nor had her figure fallen into the opposite extreme, and sharpened to meagre angularity. Its outline remained sufficient roundness not to lose the curves or grace. She had made no reply to her son's last remark, which forced him to begin anew. He thought it politic, however, to change the subject. "You remember, my mother, that some 7 of our friends are engaged to dine with us tomorrow. I trust you will not disapprove of my having invited 2 American gentlemen to join the party. After the letters of introduction they brought me, I was forced to show them some attention, and—" He paused abruptly, without venturing to add that those gentlemen were the directors of the railway company of which he had before spoken. "My son, you are aware that I never interfere with your hospitalities, but you seem to have forgotten that my Sèvres china is only a set for 12, and I can use no other on ceremonious occasions. With Bertha and Madelaine, we have 1 guest too many." "That is a matter readily arranged," replied the Count. "Madelaine need not appear at table. She is always so obliging and manageable that she can easily be requested to dine in her own room. In fact, to speak frankly, I would rather not have her present." "But should she be absent, Bertha will be annoyed," rejoined Madame de Gramont. "Bertha is a simpleton. How strange she does not see or suspect that Madelaine always throws her into the background. I said a while ago, mother, that your charities had helped to drain our purse, and this is one which I might cite, and one that galls me most. Here for 3 years you have sheltered and supported this young girl, without once reflecting upon the additional expenses we are incurring by your playing the benefactress thus grandly. It is very noble, very munificent upon your part. Still, for a number of reasons, I regret that Madelaine has become a permanent inmate of this château." "Madelaine was an orphan," replied the Countess, "the sole remaining child of Duc de Gramont, your father's nephew. When she was left homeless and destitute, did not the honor of the family force me to offer her an asylum, and to treat her with the courtesy due to a relative? Have we not always found her very grateful and very agreeable?" "I grant you very agreeable, too agreeable by half," returned the Count. "So agreeable that, as I said, she invariably throws your favourite Bertha into the shade. I confess that the necessity of always reserving for this young person, thrust upon us by the force of circumstances, a place at the table, a seat in the carriage, room upon every party of pleasure, makes her presence an inconvenience, if not a positive burden. And will you allow me to speak with great candour? May I venture to say that I have seen you, my dear mother, chafed beyond infliction, and irritated by beholding Bertha lose through contrast with Madelaine?" Her mother replied with animation, "Bertha is my grand-niece, and the granddaughter of my only sisters. The ties of blood, if nothing more, would bind me more closely to her than to Madelaine. Possibly there may have been times when I have not been well pleased to see one so dear, invariably, though most inexplicably, eclipsed. Bertha may shine forth in her most resplendent jewels, her most costly and exquisite Parisian toilette. Madeleine has only to enter in a simple muslin dress, a flower, or a knot of ribbons in her hair, and she draws all eyes magnetically upon her." "That is precisely the observation I have made," answered Count Tristan. "And, my mother, Have you never reflected on how seriously your protégé may interfere with our prospects respecting Maurice?" The Countess started. "Impossible! How could he not think of Madelaine when a union with Bertha would be much more advantageous? Youth does not think. It chooses by attraction it experiences towards this or that object," answered the Count. "Before Maurice last returned to the university 9 months ago, his admiration for Madelaine was unmistakable. Now that he is shortly to come home, and for an indefinite period, now that our plans must ripen, I have come to the conclusion that Madelaine must be removed, or they will never attain fruition. She must not be allowed to cast the spell of her dangerous fascination over him. Something must be done, and that before Maurice returns. In a fortnight he will be here." Before the Countess could reply, a young girl bounded into the room with a letter in one hand and a roll of music on the other. It would be difficult to find a more perfect type of the pure blonde than was manifested in the person of this fair young maiden. The word dazzling might be applied without exaggeration to the lustrous whiteness of complexion tinged in the cheeks as though by the reflection of a seashell. Her full dewy lips disclosed milky rows of childlike teeth within. Her eyes were of the clearest azure, but, in spite of their expression of mingled tenderness and gaiety, one who could pause to lay the finger upon an imperfection would note that something was wanting to complete their beauty. The eyebrows were too faintly traced, the lashes too light, though long, the low brow straight, slender nose, the soft curve of the chin, the fine oval of the face were obviously an inheritance. At a single glance it was impossible not to be struck with the resemblance which these classic features bore to those of the Countess. But the sportive dimples, pressed as though by a caressing touch upon the cheeks and chin of the young girl, destroyed even more the totally opposite coloring, the likeness in the two countenances. The hair of the Countess had been remarkable for its shining blackness, while the yellow acacia was not more brightly golden than the silken tresses of Bertha. Tresses that ran in ripples and lost themselves in a sunny stream of natural curls, which seemed audaciously bent on breaking their bonds, and looked as though they were always in frolic. In vain they were smoothed back by the skilful fingers of an expert femme de chambre, and confined in an elaborate knot at the back of Bertha's small head. The rebellious locks would wave and break into fine rings upon the white brow, and lovingly steal in stray ringlets down the alabaster throat, ignoring conventional restraint as sportively as their owner. Bertha de Merivale, like Madelaine, was an orphan, but, unlike Madelaine, an heiress. The Marquis de Merivale, Bertha's uncle, was also her guardian. He allowed her every year to spend a few months with her mother's relatives, who warmly pleaded for these annual visits. Her sojourn at the château de Gramont was always a season of delight to Bertha herself, for she dearly loved her great-aunt, liked the Count Tristan, and enjoyed the society of Maurice, and was enthusiastically attached to Madelaine. A letter from Maurice!" exclaimed Bertha, dancing around her aunt as she held out the epistle. The Countess broke the seal eagerly, and, after glancing over the first lines, exclaimed, "Here is news indeed! We did not expect Maurice for a fortnight, but he writes that he will be here tomorrow. How little time we have for the preparation! And I intended to order so many improvements made in his chamber, and to quite remodel." "Oh, of course, Everything will have to be remodeled for the Vicomte Maurice de Gramont. Nothing will be good enough for him. Everyone will sink into insignificance at his coming. We poor forlorn damsels will henceforth be of no account. No one will waste a thought on us, said Bertha. On the contrary, replied her aunt, I never had your happiness more in my thoughts than at this moment. Be sure you wear your blue brocade tomorrow, and the blue net interwoven with pearls in your hair, and that turquoise which Maurice always admired. Be sure that I play the coquette, you mean, as my dear aunt did before me, answered Bertha merrily. No, indeed, aunt. That may have been done in your day, but it does not suit in ours. We of present time do not wear nets for the express purpose of ensnaring the admiration of young men, or don our most becoming dresses to lay up their hearts for their foals. I am going to seek Madelaine to tell her this news, and I have another surprise for her. What is it? Inquired the Countess in an altered tone. This great parcel of music, which I sent to Paris to obtain expressly for her. But I have something else which she must not see today. This bracelet, the exact pattern of the one my uncle presented to me upon my last birthday, and Madelaine shall receive this upon her birthday. That will be tomorrow. As she spoke, she clasped upon her small wrist a band of gold, fastened by a knot formed of pearls, and gaily held up her round white arm before the eyes of the Count and Countess. The latter caught up her uplifted hand and said gravely, Bertha, music and bracelets are quite appropriate for you, but they do not suit Madelaine. Madelaine is poor, worse than poor, wholly dependent upon... There you are mistaken, aunt, returned Bertha warmly. As I am rich, she is not poor. That is, she will not always be poor, and she shall not be dependent upon anyone, not even upon you. I mean to settle upon her a marriage portion if she choose to marry, and a handsome income if she remains single. Very generous and romantic upon your part, replied the Countess, ironically, but unfortunately for her, you have no power at present over your property. You cannot play the benefactress without the consent of your guardian, and that you will never obtain. But if I marry, I will have the right, answered Bertha naively. You will have to have the consent of your husband to obtain, and that will be equally difficult. That is true, but I am not discouraged. I suppose that when I am of age I shall have the power, and I need not marry before then. I am 16, nearly 17. It will not be so very long to wait, and I am determined to serve Madelaine. This may occur to make you change your mind before you obtain your majority. Meanwhile, you are fostering tastes in Madelaine which are unsuited to her condition. I know you think me very severe, but... No, aunt, you are never severe towards me. You are only too kind, too indulgent. You spoil me with too much love and consideration, and it is because you have spoiled me so completely that I mean to be saucy enough to speak out just what I think. Bertha seated herself upon the footstool at her aunt's feet, took her hand caressingly, and with an earnest air prattled on. It is with Madelaine that you are severe, and you grow more and more severe every day. You speak to her so harshly, so disdainfully at times, that I scarcely recognize you. One would not imagine that she is your grandniece as much as I am. That is, almost as much, for she was the grandniece of the Count de Gramont, my uncle. You find incessant fault with her, and she seems to irritate you by her very presence. Oh, I have seen it for a long time, and during this last visit I see it more than ever. Bertha! commenced her aunt in a tone which might have awed any less volatile and determined speaker. "Do not interrupt me, aunt. I have not done yet, and I must speak. Why do you put on this manner towards Madelaine? And you do put it on. It is not natural to you, for you are kind to everyone else. And have you not been most kind to her also? Were you not the only one of her proud relatives who held out a hand to her when she stood unsheltered and alone in the world? Have you not since then done everything for her, done everything but love her? Bertha, you are the only one who would venture to—" "I know it, aunt, and I am the only one who would venture, so grant me one moment more. I have not done yet. Madelaine cannot be an encumbrance, for who is so useful to your household as she? Who could replace her when you are suffering? She is the tenderest of nurses. She daily relieves you of 1,000 cares. When you have company, is it not Madelaine who sees that everything is in order? If you give a dinner, is it not Madelaine who not only superintends all the preparation, but invents the most beautiful decorations for the table, and out of nothing, out of leaves and flowers so common that no one have thought of culling them, yet so wonderfully arranged that everyone exclaims at their picturesque effect? When you have dull guests that put me to sleep, or out of patience, is it not Madelaine who amuses them? How many evenings that would have been insufferably stupid have flown delightfully, chased by her delicious voice! You make a great virtue of what was simply an enjoyment to herself. She delights as much or more in singing than anyone can delight in hearing her. That is because she delights in everything she does. She always accomplishes her work with delight. She delighted in making you that becoming cap, with its coquettishly disposed knots of violet ribbons. She delighted in turning and freshening and remaking the silk dress you wear at this moment, which fits you to perfection and looks quite new. She delighted in embroidering my cousin Tristan that pretty velvet smoking cap he has on his head. She delighted in making me the wreath which I wore at the Count de Cardaire's concert the other evening, and which everyone complimented me upon. It was her own invention, and did you not yourself remark that there was not a headdress in the room half as beautiful? Everything she touches she beautifies. The commonest object assumes a graceful form beneath her fingers. The fingers of a fairy, my cousin Maurice used to call them. And there certainly is magic in those dainty, rapidly moving hands of hers. They have an art, a skill, a facility that partakes of the supernatural. Madelaine is dependent upon your bounty, but her magic fingers make her a very valuable one. And if you would not think it very impertinent, I would like to say that we are all her debtors, rather than she ours. There, I have done. Now forgive me for my timidity. Confess that you have been too severe to Madelaine, and promise not to find fault with her any more. I will confess that she has the most charming advocate in the world, answered the Countess with affection. Madelaine must not see this bracelet until tomorrow, so I must hasten to lock it up, resumed the girl. After that I will let her know that our cousin will be here to honor her birthday. How enchanted she will be! But she makes entirely too much of him, just as you all do. The instant she hears the news, away she will fly to make preparations for his comfort. I shall only have to say, Maurice is coming, and what a commotion there will be. Bertha tripped away, leaving the Countess alone with her son. Is she not enchanting? Exclaimed the former, as Bertha disappeared. Maurice will have a charming bride. Yes, if the marriage we so earnestly desire can take place. If, I intend that it shall take place. It is my one dream, my dearest hope, said the Countess. It is mine also, replied the Count, and yet I have my doubts, my fears. In a word, I do not believe this union ever will take place if Madelaine remain here. The Countess drew herself up with indignant amazement. What do you mean? Do you think Madelaine capable of— I do not think Madelaine capable of anything wrong, but she has so much versatility of talent, she is so fascinating, her character is so lovable, that I think those talents and attractions capable of upsetting all our plans and making Maurice fall deeply in love with her. But is not Bertha fascinating, as lovely as a painter's ideal? Asked the Countess. Yes, but it is not such a striking, such an impressive, such a bewitching, bewildering style of beauty, replied her son. Mark my words, I understand young men. I know what dazzles their eyes, turns their heads. If Maurice is thrown into daily communication with Bertha and Madelaine, it is Madelaine to whom he will become attached. It must not be, said the Countess emphatically, rising up as she spoke. It shall not. I echo that it shall not, my mother, but we must take means of prevention. It is most unfortunate that Maurice returns a fortnight before we expected him. I have my plans laid and ready to carry into execution before he could arrive. Now we must hasten them. What is your scheme? Asked his mother. Madelaine has other relations, all richer than ourselves. I purpose writing to each of them, and proposing that they shall receive her, not for 3 years, as we have done, but that they shall each, in turn, invite her to spend 3 months with them. They surely cannot refuse, and her life will be very varied and pleasant, visiting from house to house every 3 months, enjoying new pleasures, seeing new faces, making new friendships. And her relatives will, in reality, be our debtors, for Madelaine is the most charming of inmates. She is always so lively and creates so much gaiety around her. She has so many resources in herself and is so useful. In fact, we are bestowing a valuable gift upon these good relatives of hers, and they ought to thank us, as I have no doubt they will. The Countess approved of her son's plan to rid them of their dangerously agreeable inmate, and the Count, without further delay, sat down to pen the projected epistles. End of chapter 1.